The second segment of the show for today, we're talking to President JWilliams of Fisk University, and he's given us some information in reference to his background, education, and some of his experiences. And we had to sort of interrupt him at the end of the first segment, and we're going to give him an opportunity to round that out, and then he will get into some information dealing with coming to Fisk University and to further the topic of Fisk University at the 21st century. And of course, President Williams, let's continue our conversation.
Well, thank you very much, and I'll see if I can maybe be a little more concise with this.
You're all right. You're all right.
But it is important.
Yeah,
I think
all of that information is important.
It's important for sort of my philosophy, quite frankly, on higher education and why historically black colleges and universities are so important. But as I started with Ernst & Young, I realized that I wanted to become a partner. And I looked around me, and although they told me all I needed to do was work hard now that I had passed the CPA exam, I looked around me and every partner in that office had a graduate degree. And so I said to myself, and I effectively said to the group there, I understand what you're saying, but on the other hand, I see what I see. And if I earn a graduate degree, it seems that I'm going to enhance my chances of becoming a partner. So I went off to the MBA program at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And that was a wonderful eye-opening experience for me, because while I was there, they asked me to teach. I had never thought about teaching. And that first time I taught that first class of 55 students, not one of whom looked like me, I might add. And they were sitting there with their mouths open like, who is this young guy?
James Haney at Ohio University at the same time. Go on, I know the experience.
Who is this young guy trying to teach us? But it was one of the best experiences of my life. And it occurred to me while I was answering a student's question one day that this is what I was intended to do. This is what God would have me do, quite frankly. I looked at that student, I answered his question, at least I thought I did, looked at him and realized that he didn't get it yet, and that I had to figure out a way to help him get it. And I did. And that launched me, if you will. I then decided I was going to go into academia. I went to a PhD program at the University of Georgia. I finished that program and started my career at Notre Dame. I was at the University of Notre Dame, by that time I was 27. I was at the University of Notre Dame as an assistant professor in accounting. I spent 5 years there, decided I wanted to study the law, not because I wanted to practice law, but because I wanted to know the law. And Notre Dame would pay for it. I just had to convince the dean of the law school to let me do it on a part-time basis, and the dean of my business school to let me do it while I taught full-time. And they agreed. And so I did it. And after the first year, I realized that I really wanted to stay in higher education, but I also wanted to know the law in higher education. So I transferred to Georgetown University's Law Center because they had the expert who covered the law in higher education. So I moved there. They agreed to pay for my education at Georgetown, and I went to the business school there. And I stayed there at the business school for 8 years. During that time, I finished a couple of law degrees, focusing on higher education, then corporate law and tax law. And then I went into administration. I spent 1 year at Florida A&M University under the auspices and guidance of Dean Sybil Mobley, a real icon in business education. And so I got my first year under my belt with her. Then I moved to Texas Southern University for my first administrative position as assistant dean for 1 year. And then the next year I went to Delaware State University, where I spent 5 years as dean. I then went back to my alma mater at NCCU. I spent 5 years there as dean. And then I finished at Grand Valley State University, where I spent 8.5 years, closer to where my wife is from in Flint, Michigan. So I was there 8.5 years when I came down here.
And so you've really made the rounds in a real sense at historical black institutions as well as other institutions of higher education. And you've gone to some of the most prestigious institutions. You've got degrees from some of the most prestigious institutions. And now you're faced with the challenge of dealing with the oldest historical black institution in the United States, in the southern parts of the United States, and one that is better known in a real sense throughout the world than it is. And so we're certainly glad to hear that information. Let's talk about, how did you come to Fisk University, come into Fisk University?
Well, first of all, when I grew up in Winston-Salem, I didn't know where Fisk was, but I knew about Fisk. In our communities, we talked about Fisk because Fisk always meant something more than just a university, now I know, in Nashville, Tennessee. It meant what we could be. It was a promise, if you will, of who we could be as a race. It was about intellect development. It was about accomplishment. It was about success. It was about excellence. And so I knew about Fisk. And so when I got the call from the headhunter, I readily said yes. And when I went to that first interview, I'll never forget the search firm asking me the question, why Fisk? And I said, because it's Fisk.
That's right.
I mean, isn't that enough? I mean, after all the history and tradition and you know, the legacy of excellence.
Du Bois's and all the rest of them and all this.
Absolutely.
And the connections that that institution has outside of the South and et cetera, and how graduates from Fisk University go to the Harvards and et cetera.
Absolutely.
Hey, yeah, let's go on.
that was reason enough. And you know, when I go around the country even now, when I say that I'm at Fisk, even if persons don't really know where Fisk is, the first thing they say to me is academic excellence. They know that about
That's what
Fisk.
it represents.
That's what Fisk represents. And that's what attracted me as much as anything, quite frankly.
And of course, you've got a challenge, and all of the challenges that you're able to at least deal with now. And so you're here at Fisk University. Now, what would you like to do before we get into the challenges and the opportunities? What would you like for folks to know in reference to you being here at Fisk University at this particular moment? About the next minute and 45 seconds.
Well, I think the main thing I'd like folks to know is that, first of all, we're going to pay homage to what Fisk has been, to its tradition. Because as President Lincoln said many, many years ago, there are no accidents. For every effect must have its cause. The past is the cause of the present, and the present is going to be the cause of the future. And we are here where we are as a Fisk University because of the folks who came before us. It didn't just happen. Persons made it happen. And we want to make sure that we don't take that lightly. And at the same time, we want to be able to build and take advantage of the moment to make sure that we are preparing for the future. Because the future depends on what we do now. And we're going to make sure that we're doing what we should do now to ensure that Fisk will be around for another 147 years. And
it has persisted in spite of everything. We've been here for almost 35 years. I'm at Tennessee State University, have been for the last 35 years, but Fisk has always been here and always been there. And no matter what the problems might have been, Fisk has always been able to overcome it. And I think as one of the great writers once said about his death, I think the demise of Fisk has been projected many times, but nevertheless, and I'm just so glad to see that the kind of spirit that you bring to that institution is still there for Fisk, and I think it will be the thing that will allow Fisk to overcome all of those issues. But we're going to talk about the challenges and the opportunities after this second commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Back to the final segment of the show for today.